You spend a lifetime quietly predicting how others feel, but who notices you? Your greatest gift might also be your darkest curse. Stay with me, because Carl Jung had a hidden warning about people exactly like you. You always knew you were different, but never why. Quietly, you've watched as the world celebrated those who speak loudly, act boldly, and exist comfortably at the surface. You never fit into that world. Instead, you found yourself seeing what others overlook, sensing truths people aren't ready to accept. It felt like a special gift, didn't it? A subtle power of perception others seemed blind to. But what if your greatest strength is silently sabotaging your life, pushing you further into the shadows? Carl Jung had a name for people exactly like you, the introverted intuitives. He admired them, yes, but he also feared deeply for their fate. See, Jung knew something unsettling about you. He understood that the intuitive mind is never truly quiet. It's constantly flooded with visions, insights, subtle feelings about the future and past, hints about people's hidden motivations. You can decode someone's entire personality in minutes, yet you still find yourself frozen, unable or unwilling to act upon those visions. You're haunted by how clearly you understand others, and yet how utterly misunderstood you feel. There's a chilling paradox here. The more you see, the less you're seen. The introverted intuitive lives in a permanent state of hidden anxiety, not from ignorance, but from knowing too much and doing too little. A 2020 Columbia University study found that people who process the world intuitively are far more prone to psychological isolation and existential paralysis. They rarely trust others enough to reveal their visions, so they end up trapped in their own minds, silently fading. The very clarity you pride yourself on, this intense ability to feel beneath the surface, is precisely what's pulling you into emotional invisibility. But here's Jung's hidden warning, the secret truth he concealed behind his gentle words. If your intuition remains trapped, your mind will turn into a prison. You risk becoming a ghost within your own life, unseen, unheard, always present yet never acknowledged. You feel so deeply, yet that depth isolates you. You predict others' pain, but who senses yours? And worst of all, the world applauds your silence, calling it wisdom when it's actually quiet desperation. This video isn't here to praise your gifts. It's here to expose the shadow behind them, the side of you that Jung warned could consume your identity. Because your intuition is not a harmless talent. It's a powerful force demanding action. And if left unused, it won't just fade. It'll start feeding off your own life energy. It will turn your vivid perceptions into illusions, your sharp insights into paralyzing doubt, and your compassionate silence into quiet self-destruction. So, ask yourself, have you mistaken your solitude for strength, your silence for peace? Jung knew better, and deep down, so do you. The shadow side of being an introverted intuitive isn't quiet wisdom. It's emotional invisibility. And it's finally time you confront that truth before your silence becomes irreversible. You've trained yourself to disappear before anyone has the chance to reject you. It's not conscious, but it's precise. You feel the tension in a room before a word is spoken. You already know who's lying, who's insecure, who's silently crying behind a forced laugh. You adjust yourself accordingly. Smooth the edges. Swallow the discomfort. Speak only when it's safe. But this ability, this hyperperceptiveness that once protected you, is now erasing you. You were told it's better to understand than to confront. That maturity is choosing peace over reaction. So you learn to read people instead of expressing yourself. You analyze the pain behind their anger. You justify betrayal because you understand their childhood. You forgive too early, apologize too often, and explain yourself to people who never truly asked. Not because you're weak, but because your intuition taught you how to survive by predicting danger and preemptively softening your presence. Jung called this the danger of ungrounded intuition. When you live entirely in forecasts and psychic impressions, you begin to lose your foothold in reality. You stop engaging with the world as it is, and instead, you navigate it like a minefield, anticipating every emotional explosion before it happens. But here's the cost. When you always adapt, you never declare. When you constantly predict, you stop participating. You see futures that never arrive and betray yourself in the present moment. And while everyone praises your empathy and calm, they have no idea how often that calm is a mask for fear. How many conversations you walk away from feeling like you've shrunk. How many relationships you maintain where your truth is absent because the version of you they love is the version that doesn't challenge, doesn't claim, doesn't fully exist. There's a silent kind of pain that comes from always seeing too much, but being seen too little. You sense what others need before they speak, but your needs remain locked in a vault no one dares open. You become fluent in emotional fluency for others, but not for yourself. And that quiet ache, that low hum of erasure, isn't sensitivity. It's slow self-destruction. The mind of an introverted intuitive is a blade, sharp, subtle, precise. But if you never use it to cut through the illusions in your own life, it rusts inward. You end up turning it against yourself. Every unspoken truth becomes self-doubt. Every avoided confrontation becomes a new boundary crossed. Every time you bite your tongue, you teach the world that your voice is optional. And maybe that's the truth no one warned you about. You were never too intense. You were just surrounded by people who couldn't handle clarity. So you dulled yourself down and started to disappear. If this resonates with the silence you've been living, like the video, subscribe to the channel. That's how this space stays alive. You've built a quiet skill that no one taught you, but life demanded. The ability to understand people even when they don't deserve it. You see their wounds, their unresolved pasts, their traumas masquerading as cruelty. And so you don't get angry, you explain. You don't walk away, you rationalize. You don't confront, you empathize. This emotional X-ray vision became your way of surviving relationships that didn't know how to hold your truth. But what began as depth slowly mutated into captivity. At some point, your ability to understand others became a cage. Every time someone disrespects you, you instantly trace it back to their fear of abandonment, their emotionally unavailable parents, their inner child screaming for love. And maybe you're right. Maybe that's exactly what's happening. But the question is, does that truth require your silence? Does understanding them mean abandoning yourself? Carl Jung warned about this trap. He spoke of the danger of merging with the emotional reality of others to the point of self-dissolution. He knew that the introverted intuitive, by nature, absorbs, often too much, too deeply. And when that absorption isn't followed by boundaries, by action, by a declaration of what you need, you become a mirror instead of a person. You reflect everyone's pain, but forget your own face. This is the hidden martyrdom of the emotionally lucid. You carry emotional intelligence like a blessing, but you're bleeding beneath it. You smile with compassion as people cross lines you never agreed to. You nod in understanding while your nervous system screams. You explain away patterns that are quietly destroying you, because your mind is too sophisticated to reduce things to black and white. But the cost of all that nuance is that you keep staying in places that fracture you. There's something almost holy about how much you care. But holiness without self-respect becomes self-obliteration. Empathy without limit becomes servitude. And wisdom without anger becomes silence where truth should roar. You've confused being understanding with being invincible. You believe that because you can hold space for their pain, you must. That because you get why they act this way, you have to stay. But you don't. Their unresolved story is not your lifelong responsibility. Their past is not your permission slip to be mistreated. And maybe the most painful truth of all, some people count on your empathy to avoid changing. They weaponize your compassion. They know you'll explain it away. They know you'll say that it didn't mean it. They're just scared. They're doing their best. And so they never grow, because you never leave, because you keep choosing understanding over self-respect. This isn't just about one person, one relationship, one moment. This is about a lifetime of being emotionally intelligent in a world that abuses that intelligence. A world that teaches you to be proud of your empathy while quietly applauding your silence. But what if your greatest wisdom isn't in explaining the pain of others? It's in finally honoring your own. What if the real evolution is not in how well you understand, but in how courageously you stop tolerating? The curse of emotional lucidity is that you can see every reason behind the wound. But until you draw a line, that wound becomes yours to carry. And that's not empathy. That's self-betrayal dressed in insight. There's a version of you that the world applauds. Calm, wise, unshakably composed. The one who doesn't overreact, who stays grounded, who offers insight instead of outrage. They call you mature, evolved, enlightened. But deep beneath that serenity, there's a roar you've learned to silence. A storm you've taught yourself to keep chained. Because long ago, you realized that the full intensity of your presence made people uncomfortable. So you built something safer, a persona. Carl Jung called this construction the persona, a social mask we develop to navigate external expectations. But when the persona becomes a replacement for the self, it doesn't just hide your truth. It begins to starve it. And in your case, that starvation has gone unnoticed for too long. You've played the calm one so well that you've forgotten what it feels like to fully exist without constraint. But that mask comes with a price. It hides not only your chaos, but your power. You've learned to neutralize your anger so quickly it never even reaches the surface. You convert pain into wisdom before you allow yourself to feel it. You process your rage intellectually before it ever touches your body. And on the outside, you appear balanced, collected. But inside, there's heat, there's friction, there's a wild, raw energy that's been exiled in the name of emotional maturity. This is the inflation of a shadow, Jung's term for what happens when we suppress the unacceptable parts of ourselves for too long. Eventually, those parts don't just wait patiently in silence. They swell, they distort, they erupt in moments of misdirected fury, numbness, or inner collapse. And you're left wondering where it came from when it's been there all along. You were conditioned to see your intensity as dangerous. Maybe you were told to calm down, to not be too sensitive, to be the wise one in moments of chaos. So you performed. You turned emotion into insight, fire into stillness. But insight without embodiment becomes dissociation, and stillness without truth becomes suffocation. You've made stillness your identity, but at what cost? You've stopped defending yourself. You've stopped asserting your needs. You've stopped allowing the world to see what you're actually feeling. Because somewhere along the line, you started to believe that if you ever let it all out, you'd be too much, that your realness would be rejected, that your fire would burn the people you love. But fire isn't destruction. It's clarity. It's power. It's life. And the longer you suppress that fire, the colder your world becomes. You begin to attract relationships where your silence is convenient, where your compliance is rewarded, where your soul shrinks to fit someone else's comfort zone. You weren't born to be the wise observer in everyone else's drama. You weren't meant to exist as a reflection of peace while your own truth goes unspoken. There's a wildness in you that's not a flaw, it's a force. But it's been shamed, silenced, shrunken into a role that keeps you spiritually safe and emotionally starving. You don't need more calm. You need more honesty. You don't need to be more grounded. You need to be more real. And maybe it's time to let that shadow speak, not to destroy, but to set you free. Because if the persona keeps winning, your truth will keep vanishing. And no applause is worth that. After years of being misunderstood, diminished, or simply unseen, you started to believe that stillness was a higher form of existence. That your silence meant you had evolved beyond the chaos. That observing and detachment was a form of wisdom. And maybe for a while it was, but now it's something else. Now it feels like a throne built from isolation, a quiet pedestal that looks like peace, but smells like pride. And the truth? You've confused withdrawal with awakening. It's not that you don't feel. You feel everything. You just don't react anymore. Not because you've mastered emotional maturity, but because reacting makes you vulnerable. Because expressing might shatter the quiet image you've worked so hard to protect. Because part of you still equates stillness with strength. But strength isn't silence. It's exposure with integrity. It's speaking when your voice trembles. It's facing discomfort without a mask. Carl Jung understood how easily the introverted intuitive can fall into this trap. The trap of believing their inner world is enough. That understanding is superior to engaging. That silence is safer than presence. But Jung didn't celebrate withdrawal as the final form of consciousness. He warned that detachment, when left unexamined, turns into shadow inflation. A subtle ego that wears the mask of enlightenment while hiding behind the fear of being seen in real time. The deeper danger here is psychological superiority. You stop engaging not because you've outgrown the noise, but because you secretly believe you're beyond it. You view the emotional chaos of others with a distant compassion, but no longer allow yourself to enter the arena. You stay in the observer's seat, analyzing life instead of participating. It becomes your identity, the quiet one, the wise one, the untouchable one. But what if that detachment is just fear wrapped in elegance? You no longer fight, not because you've found peace, but because you've given up on being understood. You no longer share your truth, not because it doesn't matter, but because you've decided no one can hold it. So you withhold. You intellectualize. You call it solitude, but it's starting to feel like exile. You're not living above the world. You're orbiting it. And here's the most confronting part. That silence you've cultivated, that distance you wear like armor. It might be keeping you safe, but it's also keeping you invisible. Because no one can love what they can't feel. No one can connect to someone who refuses to enter the mess with them. You become an island. Beautiful, self-contained, and utterly unreachable. Real introspection doesn't isolate, it integrates. It doesn't hover, it lands. True strength doesn't need distance to survive. It walks into the fire knowing it won't lose itself. And maybe that's what you've been missing. Not more insight, not more quiet, but more presence. Messy, imperfect, real presence. Because staying on the outside looking in doesn't make you wise. It just makes you absent. And absence, no matter how graceful, is still abandonment. Even if it looks holy. Even if it feels safe. Even if no one ever calls it what it is. You thought silence made you untouchable. But maybe it just made you unreachable. And no truth is worth keeping if it costs you the right to be fully human. You've always lived in the realm of possibility. While others speak of facts, you speak of meaning. While they plan steps, you envision outcomes. Your mind doesn't move in straight lines. It leaps. It weaves patterns from fragments, finds signals in the noise, senses direction in moments no one else notices. You see what could be, what should be, what no one else dares imagine. But the question that haunts you now isn't about vision. It's about embodiment. If you can see so much, why haven't you moved? Your ideas are alive, but they're starting to rot inside you. Not from lack of brilliance, but from lack of form. You rewrite, reimagine, revisit, but rarely release. You circle your dreams like a hawk, waiting for the perfect moment to land. But that moment never arrives, because what you're really waiting for is certainty, safety, approval, a guarantee that the world won't reject what you carry. And so, instead of risking exposure, you stay in the womb of potential. Carl Jung warned that intuition ungrounded in the material world becomes fantasy. That inner knowing, when not channeled into action, turns against itself. And that's what you're living now. The erosion of self-confidence beneath a mountain of unrealized insight. You have books unfinished, letters unwritten, talents untouched. Not because you're lazy, but because you've mistaken preparing for living. Planning became a ritual, but rituals don't build lives. Actions do. This is where the shadow of the intuitive shows its teeth. Because not moving can feel noble. You tell yourself you're being patient, that you're still refining the idea, that the time isn't right, that you need more clarity, more energy, more alignment. But beneath every excuse is fear. Not of failure, but of being seen. Of launching something that exposes your inner world to a society that doesn't know how to hold it. You've been convinced that the world doesn't understand people like you. That your ideas are too deep, too complex, too sensitive to thrive in this loud, fast, pragmatic reality. So you retreat into the one place that's never judged you. Your mind. And while that space has protected you for years, now it's imprisoning you. You're no longer just preserving your vision. You're hiding in it. Because if you never act, no one can reject you. No one can distort what you created. No one can fail to receive it. But here's the hidden cost. The longer you wait, the more your power leaks. Your clarity turns into confusion. Your urgency turns into numbness. Your fire dims under the weight of your own hesitation. Vision is sacred, but without incarnation, it means nothing. Intuition without movement becomes a cage lined with beautiful ideas that never touch the world. And you, who could have built something meaningful, become a ghost haunting a life that never happened. You're not lacking creativity. You're starving for courage. You don't need more time. You need more willingness to be wrong, to be raw, to be real. Because no one will come knock on your door asking for your visions. You have to bring them to life, even if your voice shakes. Even if it's imperfect. Even if you're not ready. Some of the most beautiful truths die not from hatred, but from hesitation. And maybe that's what's really at stake here. Not your work, not your reputation, not your dream, but the part of you that's been waiting to become. You've been told you're different, gifted, deep. People say they admire your mind, your calm, your insight. They say you have something rare. And maybe you believe them. Maybe for a while, that felt like enough. Like quiet praise could replace connection. Like being rare was better than being real. But here's the truth no one says aloud. You're not special. You're just unseen. And all that depth means nothing if the world never feels it. You've built an identity around being misunderstood. There's a kind of comfort in it. The story that you're too much for this world. That your thoughts are too complex, your feelings too intense, your truths too heavy. But what if that story became your hiding place? What if the narrative of being unique is just another way you justify staying silent, staying safe, staying small? Carl Jung said the greatest danger for the introverted intuitive is losing touch with reality. Not because they're delusional, but because their inner world becomes more seductive than the outer one. You've learned to trust your visions more than the responses of those around you. And maybe that protected you once. But now, it's turning you invisible. You keep waiting for someone to truly see you, to recognize what you carry, to invite you to finally show everything you are. But no one's coming. Not because you're unworthy, but because you've made yourself so easy to ignore. You speak only when you're sure it's safe. You share just enough to stay relevant, but never enough to be known. You let others take the stage while you whisper brilliance from the shadows. You've convinced yourself that if people were more intuitive, they'd sense your depth, that the right ones would just know. But connection doesn't work that way. No one can meet you where you refuse to stand. No one can feel what you won't express. And no one will remember you for the ideas you never dared to release. You think your silence protects your essence, but it doesn't. It erases it. Every time you choose not to speak, not to act, not to step forward, you make yourself easier to forget. And deep down, that terrifies you. Not because you want attention, but because you crave witnessing. The ache isn't to be famous, it's to be felt. But to be felt, you have to risk misunderstanding. You have to risk being too much, too intense, too real. Because hiding behind complexity doesn't make you powerful. It makes you absent. And absence is not mystery, it's loss. Of time, of impact, of life. Jung's warning was never about isolation for the sake of purity. It was about the cost of detachment. The way the intuitive mind, if unanchored, becomes a ghost. And you, of all people, weren't made to haunt this world. You were meant to shake it. You keep thinking the world will come find your brilliance. It won't. It doesn't chase what hides. And it doesn't beg for what doesn't stand. Your silence may feel noble, but it's slowly becoming a coffin. This isn't about proving your worth. It's about living it. In the open. In the risk. In the fire of being seen. Because no one can receive what you bury. And no soul can shine through a life lived entirely in shadows. You thought solitude would heal you. That disappearing for a while would bring clarity. That withdrawing from the noise would reconnect you to something sacred. And maybe in the beginning it did. The silence felt clean. Safe. Pure. But what started as refuge slowly became exile. And now, it's harder to return. Carl Jung warned that what we avoid in ourselves doesn't dissolve. It waits. It waits in the shadow. It waits in our hesitation. It waits in the places where we stopped participating in life. The introverted intuitive is not weak, but they are at risk. Because the deeper your vision runs, the easier it is to float above the world instead of walking through it. The mind becomes a sanctuary, but also a sedative. And little by little, you forget how to act, how to assert, how to risk being wrong in front of others. But nothing alive stays untouched. Stillness becomes suffocation. Clarity turns into doubt. Insight without embodiment becomes an endless echo in an empty chamber. You tell yourself you're refining the truth, but what you're really doing is hiding. You think you're protecting your depth, but you're just postponing your emergence. Kierkegaard called it despair, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, civilized kind. The despair of someone who's no longer in conflict because they've stopped trying. The kind that wears a composed face, but behind the eyes, there's no presence, only performance. A soul that has folded itself so many times to fit others' comfort that it forgot its original shape. You don't scream. You don't fall apart. You just slowly stop being here. You smile when expected. You nod when you disagree. You fade where you once would have burned. And people keep thanking you for being so balanced. They'll never see the cost. But you do. You feel it when you lie in bed at night, wondering how you became so numb. You feel it when you reread your own messages, realizing you never said what you meant. You feel it when you're praised for your grace, and all you want to do is finally scream. This is what Jung feared, that the intuitive type, if cut off from reality for too long, begins to decay not with noise, but with silence. that the shadow doesn't need to be loud to destroy. It only needs to be neglected. So here's what remains. Not another insight, not another layer of understanding, but a choice. A brutal, beautiful choice to stop watching and start participating, to stop analyzing and start acting, to stop folding and start taking up space. You were never meant to be a theory. You were meant to be felt. Let them misinterpret. Let them misunderstand. Let them reject what they can't hold. But stop rejecting yourself in their name. Stop hiding behind nuance when what your soul really needs is impact. Stop choosing invisibility and calling it peace. Because if you keep walking further into the shadow without turning back, you won't just lose your voice. You'll lose the memory of ever having one. You're a lighthouse, but if you refuse to light up, you become nothing more than a ruin, forgotten, decorative, and surrounded by the same darkness you were born to guide others through. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. That's how this fire keeps burning.